Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about John Cooper Clarke's book, What? So this is a poetry collection. Clarke is famously referred to as the punk poet. To a certain extent, I can see why. There is a sort of irreverence, there is a sort of anti-establishment, anti-authoritarian streak in Clarke's poetry. To me, it doesn't really read that punk, though. It tends to read more sort of beatnik with bluesy and jazzy influences, which I don't have a problem with. I mean, I like the beats reasonably well. One thing about Clarke's work that I often don't care about much for is that sometimes the focus seems to be more on rhyme scheme than necessarily on making sense at a sort of content level. And again, this is something we see with the beats, where content is not really the driving force. It is about sort of sound, images, sensations, etc. But we see this, for instance, with a poem like Thug. So I'm actually just going to read you the last word of each line so that you can see how thorough this is. I will read you some other whole poems so you can start to get a sense of this, but just pay attention to how many of the final words in the lines rhyme with thug. Mist, fug, he, tug, shrug, complex, thug, lug, pug, snug, rug, bug, thug, slug, jug, glug, thug, smug, dug, mug, plug, change, thug. So, I mean, there's 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 23 lines in this poem. Of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, by my count, don't rhyme. Now, on the one hand, that's a kind of impressive feat, right? That's an exceptional degree of rhyming a single word. But again, it feels to me like the objective is to rhyme as opposed to for the poem itself to make that much sense or to really... it feels like shoehorning rhymes in for the sake of shoehorning rhymes in. And I wasn't massively sold on it. But what I do like about Clarke's poetry is a lot of it deals with these sort of sociological issues, right? Questions about how people live their lives. How they present themselves in the world, their style, their aesthetic, and how that aligns with or challenges social values. So we get this, for instance, in a poem like Smooth Operetta, which I'm going to read to you now. Smooth Operetta. Hopsack with a permacrease authorized by the style police. Frogmouth pockets on a flat front. For work or leisure or coming the cunt. When it comes to the classic Callard's mate, Farrah's since 78. I got a pair in Air Force Blue, they look okay with a slip-on shoe. A nice Oxford in a muted plaid, or a Pringle wouldn't look too bad. You can't pull off a pair of pegs, Farrah, they cover your legs. A carpet knife with double blades, a gamp for when it's damp. Some shades for when the twilight fades, Smooth Operetta, weekend in Lanzaretta. Neat, 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 neat. Please do not make me repeat. The dress code is hard and brief. Look out for the F motif. Spick and Spanish borderline sportive. Spotless, alive, she cried. Farrah's, the parallel stride. So again, you get the sort of rhythm of this that I think really does have more of a sort of bluesy style for me than a punk style necessarily. But we're also seeing in this poem that fascination with rhyme, whether that's rhyming couplets, Hermacrease style police, flat front coming the cunt, mate 78 throughout the first stanza, or interior rhyme. A gamp for when it's damp, some shades for when the twilight fades, smooth operetta, weekend in Lanzaretta. Right? We've got these, within each of those is a line, right? Damp is within the same line. That's internal rhyme. So again, Clarke is very, very interested in this, the sort of the aesthetics of sound, the aesthetics of how the poem, how we hear the poem, right? And that's totally fine, as long as it's sort of clear that the poem is doing something for me, right? That's sort of the thing. When that becomes the objective in itself, if it's just about, I want to hear rhymes as opposed to I want a poem that is saying something, for me, that's where it sort of falls short. I'm going to read you another poem about style and the way that someone engages within the world. It's Blue Collar Walla, though I suspect in the interests of rhyme scheme it's supposed to be Blue Collar Walla as opposed to collar, the way that I would normally pronounce it. And I haven't heard Clarke himself read this. I don't know with his accent. I have heard him speak, but I don't know with his accent if that would come out as Kala. But since he's very into rhyme schemes, I suspect that that's what it's intended to be. So, Blue Collar Walla. There's a heteronormative handyman west of the fair trade aisle. He's wearing full-length trousers and a patriarchal smile. He's shod in manly footwear, his house phone has a dial, he doesn't deal with crank calls, his attitude is on file. He's an old-school delinquent eating chips and drinking ale while listening to the Beatles. He ought to be in jail. His obstinate resistance to every social fad keeps him at a distance, but his influence is bad. He could be the plumber, the mechanic, or your dad, smoking his way to an early grave. When he gets there, we'll be sad. He's an old-school delinquent with a Coastal whale tail. He built the world we live in. He ought to be in jail. His emotional illiteracy keeps him on the ball. Women crawl all over him, begging him to call, round with his pheromonal armpits and his usefulness and all. They got conscientious heat pumps that they'd like him to install. All attempts to improve him were somehow doomed to fail. Still, we can't remove him. He ought to be in jail. Dependable, commendable, he's hardly ever broke. Underneath his Harrington there beats a heart of oak. Give him a messy job, he'll answer okie doke. He's a Jason Statham look-alike. Let's face it, he's a bloke. A bloke who could drink Canada Dry, and I don't mean ginger ale. Old school delinquent. He ought to be in jail. His sick sense of humor helps where misery is rife. Not for him the brothers grim, or the two-way sporting life. Put your dreams away, Jim. He's faithful to his wife. He could take on the world and win with a clawback hammer and a ratchet knife. With the gift of immortality, he reckons you will find life is life whatever, neither fair nor is it kind. Every previous occupant left a mess behind, plus bad advice is priceless to a complicated mind. He lives beyond this instant, he's on the treasure trail, old school delinquent, he ought to be in jail. He's always up for a nice cup of tea, but he'd rather have a beer. He tried that marijuana once, but it just made everything weird. His bulldog died, that's when he cried a big fat fucking tear. We'll die if we have to DIY, and he could be dead next year. He's a 2-meat and 1-veg guy, potatoes never kale. We can't afford to let him die. He ought to be in jail. And so again, there is this sort of sense of social critique, social observation, this sort of feel of undercutting the norms of polite society and sort of elevating those who are typically sort of looked down upon, judged, etc., and sort of highlighting the ways in which they represent their own aesthetic, their own approach to existing within the world. And I quite like those poems. I quite like that in Clarke's work when we have those sorts of styles. But we've also got other types of sort of irreverence in Clarke's poetry. Things where, again, he's sort of challenging the norms of maybe poetry, poetic style, what typically counts as a poem. So we've got this one, Lydia, Girl with an Itch, which really is more like a sort of schoolyard taunt or chant than it is necessarily a traditional poem as we would think of poetry in our sort of, ivory towers, this is what you've been taught in school type way. So Lydia, Girl with an Itch. Lydia, Lydia, get rid of your chlamydia. Only an idiot would ever consider you. And then there's a sort of italicized postscript. When dealing with sexual delinquency, you have to be inclusive, so here's another one on that theme, which takes us to the short poem Necrophilia. Fed up with foreplay and all that palaver, have a cadaver. So again, these are very short poems, 2 lines each, or Necrophilia is really sort of 1.5 lines. But they sort of break, again, this sort of notion of a highbrow poetry of the sort of thing that we typically think of with like Shakespearean or Petrarchan sonnets or the work of Tennyson, whatever it is, these sort of the official canon of poetry, right? They're just these sort of short, sort of rejections almost of formality and highbrowness in the interest of having a laugh, I guess, right? Just again, this sort of schoolyard humor, right? And that's the kind of thing that we get with Clarke's poetry. Again, it is very much about sort of breaking down barriers, and in that sense, there is a punk alignment to it, just on a sort of sound level, stylistic level, formal level. I don't really see the punk influence that much. But who am I to judge?